let's go ahead and get started. So we are going to be talking about deer in New Mexico tonight. And we have a special guest. We have Orrin Duvuvuei, who is our deer biologist. I'm not sure if that's your official title, but I know it's close enough. So, so welcome, Orrin. So everybody, just so we get started, we are live on Facebook. So thank you for everyone who is joining us over on Facebook, and to everyone who has joined us here in Zoom tonight. We have several people coming in, so we'll just keep talking. If you are on Facebook, we're going to keep track of the comments, so please go ahead and type in any questions you might have, and we'll do our best to keep track of them as we go throughout this presentation. And then for anyone that's here in Zoom, please feel free to use the Q&A box or the chat, and we will also keep an eye on those, and we'll put Orrin on the spot and see how many questions we can get out there for you this evening. But Orrin, why don't you go ahead and start by an introduction?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. As Tristana said, my name is Orrin Duvuvuei. I'm the officially deer program manager, but deer biologist is synonymous with that. I've been with the agency for just at 5 years, just hit 5 years in January. Grew up back east in West Virginia and Ohio, and moved out west after undergrad, and then worked out in several Western states for a while. Most recently, before coming to New Mexico, got my master's at Utah State, and then went up and worked as a wildlife biologist in Central Washington for their Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then got hired on here a couple years ago, or 5 years ago. It's been quite a pleasure.
It's nice. I grew up here in the Southwest, and it's not in New Mexico, but close by. And I've been back here almost 3 years now, and I just love the Southwest. So such a variety. And in New Mexico, I think we're lucky to have species like these great deer that are behind both you and I, as well as, you know, some unique species like oryx and ibex. So I think we're very lucky to be here. All right, so let's go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's a great state for sure to be in, quite a variety.
Absolutely. All right, let's get started. I know everyone here tonight is either our family, so quick shout out, because I see several Duvuvuei names popping up in the attendees list. So thank you guys all for joining us. But let's get started with just the basics. So what kind of deer do we have here in New Mexico?
We have two species of deer in New Mexico. We have mule deer and whitetail deer, and then with those species, those are actually both broken down into two different subspecies. So with mule deer, we have the Rocky Mountain subspecies and the desert subspecies. And then with the whitetail deer, we have the Cowles whitetail deer and the Texas whitetail deer. And they kind of, with the mule deer specifically, they kind of are a gradient between the northern part of the state to the southern part of the state. There's not a hard cutoff on where, say, a Rocky Mountain mule deer would be versus a desert mule deer, but we arbitrarily use I-40 as that cutoff. And then,
is there any characteristic differences, or do they look pretty similar?
There's a little bit of differences. They look very similar, yes, but if you put them side by side, say you got a desert mule deer from down around Animas or something like that versus a Rocky Mountain mule deer up near Chama, you put them side by side, the biggest difference would be body size. The Rocky Mountain mule deer maybe average around 200 pounds live weight for an adult buck, and then the desert mule deer will be more closer to the 150 pound range for an adult buck.
Okay.
But otherwise, characteristic, or the pelage and their antlers and stuff like that, they're all very similar, and not a big difference in growth or attributes on that.
Wonderful. So what makes them different? Is it just something from where they come from, or is it genetically that they're different?
They're not. So I would venture to guess, if you took a specimen from like a northern state, say like Montana, a Rocky Mountain mule deer from Montana, and tested the genetics from that, from a desert mule deer in Mexico, I think there would be some differences. I don't know exactly what those would be, but really and truly, it's just their size differences and kind of not behavior, but the timing of which they might breed and things like that. But in general, their biology, their the different physical characteristics and stuff are very similar.
Very interesting. And whitetail, we have a couple of species of whitetail as well, right?
Yeah, the Texas white-tailed deer, those are more on the eastern side of the state, and Tristan will bring up a map here of kind of their distributions and stuff. But yeah, we have two different subspecies, the Texas subspecies and the Cal's subspecies. Texas subspecies are kind of found along the like river bottoms and drainages and things like that on eastern part of New Mexico. I kind of think of I-25 is the main cutoff between, you know, those subspecies and stuff. You can see the light blue; those are known distributions of these Texas white-tailed deer. Just real spotty, real pockety and stuff, and they might move between the two different or the various distributions using creeks and river drainages and stuff. The red dots on there, I've started tracking just incidental sightings from members of the public or things like that, just seeing if our distribution map is still accurate. Recently, we've been getting a lot of sightings in the like the Harris Canyon and the Sandias and things like that there along right at the I-40 and 25 intersection, units 8 and 14, yeah. And that seems to be, I would say, an established population. Now, I don't know how big that would be, but it's definitely an area where deer, white-tailed deer, seem to be expanding a little bit. And then the Cal's white-tailed deer, those are more in the southwest part of the state. Again, I-25, I kind of think of it as a cutoff. Oh, Tristana, can you go back to that other map? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So Unit 20, we have a couple of sightings right there. It's unknown whether those are Texas white-tailed deer or Cal's white-tailed deer. They're just game cameras that were set up on some water sources that the deer frequented. And, you know, without having your hands on them and seeing them in person and stuff, it'd be kind of difficult to tell. But in general, I think of I-25 as the cutoff for the Cal's white-tailed deer. And those are, if you want to go to that other map when you get a chance. So yeah, you can kind of see the units where those are distributed. They're fairly abundant and spread out across units 23 and 24. Units 26 and 7 are some of our coveted Cal's white-tailed deer areas that a lot of folks like to hunt them. But you can see our historic distribution of the Cal's white-tailed deer on this map.
So do we have a lot of deer, do we have any of the coos or the white-tailed deer that go up into the northern part of the state? It looked like there was some in the dry Cimarron area, but are they mostly over here on the eastern side, or do they go over to the western side of the state as well?
So they pretty well stay, you know, the Texas white-tailed deer pretty well stay on the eastern side, and the cows pretty well stay on the western side. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a wanderer or a young male that might be kind of on the prowl or that sort of thing that might venture outside of that range. But in general, they pretty well stay to these distribution polygons that we have set up here and that sort of thing. And it kind of ties into their habitat uses. Obviously, white-tailed deer, they're very generalists in their habitat use. The Cal's white-tailed deer are able to make use of a lot more arid climates and things like that, and that goes along with their physiological makeup and whatnot. The Texas white-tailed deer, they tend to congregate or gather toward more cover, which in this arid state and on the eastern part of the state, everybody knows the cover is found closer to those riparian areas and stuff. And so although they might wander out of it and they might wander across a long grassland, they in general stick pretty well to those drainages. And those ones there into Harris Canyon and the Sandias, I've heard of some of them in the bosque along the Rio Grande. just incidental reports and things like that. So they kind of jumped up and over the mountain, it seems like, or maybe slipped through the canyon, but I haven't heard of any further west than that.
Very interesting. And you said this map, you were talking earlier, and you said it's available on the website. It's not updated with the red dots, though. Is that correct?
Yeah. So these blue polygons, the little blue shapes, they're called polygons. They're on the map. Those historic distributions are on the website. I'm sorry. But the red dots, those are what I've started mapping within the last couple of years of incidental sightings. And because those are, that's, say, Unit 43, for instance, that's a couple of sightings there that were reported to me. Don't know if they were just passing through or whatever. So I didn't want to include this on the website and have folks thinking, oh man, there's white-tailed deer in Unit 43, when in fact it might just be an individual who got lost or wandered outside of an area where he was used to and that sort of thing. So I left the red dots off, but the blue polygons for both of these species are on the website.
Wonderful. And do you solicit input from people, or is it all ancillary? Do you want people to send you comments when they see deer in new areas, or how do you normally handle that?
Yeah, it's so far it's been ancillary. I haven't really done any outreach. We do have a guy in our department who kind of keeps track of these, historic distributions of all mammals. And white-tailed deer is one that he and I have discussed, and he just gets reports from, Joe Public or somebody from maybe the BLM or Forest Service that saw one, and he's just kept a database also. And when we get a new sighting, we'll just bounce it back and forth. But that being said, if folks see, I'm not so much interested in mule deer sightings, but if they see some Texas white-tailed deer sightings outside of, well, really anywhere, I'd love to hear it. I'll throw those up on the map and see what we might have going on with those guys. The Cow's white-tailed deer, I'm interested in them for sure, but they don't seem to be as sporadic, I guess. They're kind of more, we know where they are, and so those wouldn't necessarily be beneficial to me as the eastern white-tailed deer sightings.
Interesting. And is there a way to tell the difference between in the whitetail species?
Yeah, body size again. So the Cow's white-tailed deer, they're real small. I want to say a mature buck is right around that 110 pound mark. And we do have small Texas white-tailed deer compared to, say, like Alberta or something. You'll get a 300 pound white-tailed deer up there. But in our state in New Mexico, the Texas subspecies, they're not as big, but a 150 pound live weight buck would be about average. But body size would be a telltale, and probably the best way to tell. The Cow's white-tailed deer racks aren't quite as big either. They're pretty small. I don't know what the Boone and Crockett minimum is. I don't really keep up on that stuff, but 110-inch white-tailed deer, Cow's white-tailed deer would be a big Cow's. Whereas I saw this year, and I don't know where it is, but we might have got a new state record for a Texas white-tailed deer at around, I think it was 165 or something like that. Do you remember that, Tristana? Do you remember seeing that?
I think I saw it. I don't remember what the score was, though.
Okay, yeah, I don't remember either. But so that's 50 inches of difference there. So that's another way to tell, but it's not as much of a telltale sign as, say, body size or whatever.
Okay. And so we've talked a little bit about the general areas where you can find them, but what is the habitat? I know you said they like to stick, especially the whitetail, like to stick to some of the riparian areas or heavily wooded, but if I were to go out and look for them, either to photograph, like when they're growing velvet or during hunting season, where would you start looking?
For the whitetail or mule deer or both?
Let's start with whitetail and then we'll talk about mule deer.
Okay. Yeah, so I would look again in those riparian areas on the eastern side of the state for the whitetail. I know around like Cloudcroft, there's a gob of whitetail deer around there, and pretty readily visible from the roads. You might be able to get in there and find some to photograph and whatnot if you're just looking to get out and, get your lens out and take some pictures. If you're wanting to hunt them, I would look at some of those units or some of those distribution polygons that we have mapped on the website, and kind of focus on those game management units. And then from there, really start dialing into like riparian areas. Alfalfa, we all know that alfalfa is kind of a draw for them and things like that. I wouldn't expect them to really range real far out of those riparian areas and up on, higher mountains and whatnot. They kind of tend to stick more toward the bottom. With the Cow's whitetail deer, man, they can be found anywhere. And I was talking to our Southwest biologist here a little bit ago. He's an avid Cow's whitetail deer hunter. And in general, say, like, if you think about Cow's whitetail deer hunting in Arizona, you're thinking of vast open areas, open mountains, not a lot of tree cover, some different shrubs and stuff like that. That is the case in New Mexico, especially in units 23 and 27 and 26. But then you'll get into like unit 24 or the northern areas of 23 or 22. And those Cow's whitetail deer, they are not afraid to hang out in the thick timber and the brushy stuff. And we really see them being really prolific in those areas. So I guess they can just be found. They're generalists again, so they can kind of be found wherever. And then the other part is their physiological makeup isn't such that they're tied as much to a water source. They can take advantage of other forms of water, and they can go a little bit longer without going to water than, say, the Texas whitetail deer. So they're not as restricted to the bottomlands and stuff.
So what I hear you saying is that a good pair of glasses, binoculars, or a spotting scope would be beneficial.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And a lot of patience, which I don't have, so I haven't tried for them yet. But a lot of patience and a good pair of spotters would be very beneficial, especially in that very southwest in the boot hill and whatnot. I keep looking to my right, everybody, because that's where my map is and it's easier for me to reference. But so the other part is I've heard of folks killing them from tree stands or, sitting water in that thicker stuff in units 22 and 24 and up into the 16C, those countries and stuff like that. I've heard of them sitting trails over trees or tree stands over trails and things like that. It's a waiting game at that point, and you're not glassing. It's still a lot of patience, but I've heard people being successful that way. So then
we were talking before that neither you nor I have a lot of patience to just sit a water hole. So maybe someday I'll try and hunt them, but I'll need to work on that skill significantly.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a downfall or what, but I walk my legs off a lot. I'm always curious what's over the next little ridge or what's around that next little bend. And I try to sit water, I try to glass. I can't do it. I'm 10 minutes, I get fidgety and think that there's nothing there and I need to see what's around the corner, and I start moving.
All right. And mule deer. Did we talk about mule deer?
No, we didn't. So they're pretty well distributed throughout the state. I would not be shocked to come across a mule deer anywhere in the state. That being said, there are areas where they're less inclined to be, or they may not frequent as much, like, say, like a pronghorn type habitat that would just be vast plains. And although they do very well in grasslands, some of those plains are just, there's not much vegetation in them. They're pretty well mowed down from grazing of one sort or another, or maybe there hasn't been rain there and stuff. And so the vegetation's really short. Although they might move through it, I wouldn't expect them to set up shop in those areas. I would expect them to be more on the edges and whatnot. But they can be found, they can be found at 13,000 feet all the way down to, I don't know what our lowest elevation is in the state, but all the way down into the desert country and everywhere throughout. So they're, they're well distributed. They're not as much of generalists as say a whitetail is, which is kind of contrary to what I'm describing to you. It seems like the whitetail are a little more specific versus the mule deer. But that being said, they can take advantage of the habitats or fringe habitats throughout the state, I guess.
Interesting. So one of the questions that has popped up it is about migration for mule deer, and being in this industry, and I lived in Wyoming for a while. So when I think of mule deer migration, I'm thinking of 100-mile routes. But do we have any big mule deer migrations in the state? And is there a way to pattern those for an upcoming hunt?
So we do have some, yes. In general, our state doesn't have those big migrations like you're talking about. They might do more of an elevational migration, or ping pong back and forth based on the snow cover. I'm thinking down, saying like Unit 34 in the Sacramento Mountains down there and stuff. Yeah, the higher elevations might get some snow, it might push them down for a week or two, and then that snow might subside, or it might melt off a little bit, and they might kind of ping pong back up and go back and forth that way. I am going to circle around to your main question, but I want to cover these other couple topics first. The other part is, say, like in the very arid portions of our state, like the southeast, for instance, or say units 25, 6, and 7 in the Boot Heel and whatnot. The rain down there is so sporadic, and it's monsoonal rains that might hit here, but 10 miles away there's nothing, and so, or 20 miles away, and so those deer will make seasonal movements or short-term movements to take advantage of those rainfalls. And so, although it's not a true migration, it's still a movement to meet their needs, their annual needs, or their life cycle needs and stuff like that. And so they will make those movements in relation to weather. But the northern part of the state, namely units 2B and C, unit 4, 51, 52, we do have a little bit bigger migrations in there. 51, 52, they're suspected to be a little bit further distance, maybe 10, 12 mile migrations because of snowpack. But in 2B and 4, we get migrations coming down from the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. So they'll go up into Colorado, 30, 40, 50 miles. Some are up there. Once the snow gets too deep up there, they'll start moving down into our state and setting up shop for the winter. We had an individual map the migration routes of the deer in 2B, Hall Sawyer, out of Wyoming. He did that, I want to say 2014 through 16, and found their migration routes and how they used that landscape and where they went up to summer. Recently, the Department of Game and Fish, as part of this big migration push, Secretarial Order 3362, we recently initiated a couple of migration projects around Chama area, and we're going to have some captures here in a couple weeks. Still in the Chama area, but a little further south in units 5 and 51. But last year we went and caught deer, elk, and pronghorn up in units 4 and 52 to see where they migrate to, and just now completed our first annual cycle on those collars. They have GPS collars on them. And for the deer, we found that they moved like from unit 4, and they went, I don't know the furthest distance. I want to say it was around, again, that 30-mile range or something, but they went up, skirted around Chama, and then went up into the San Juans to set up shop for the summer. And then now they're back on their winter range, like around the Rio Chama wildlife area and stuff like that. So there seems to be their winter range. For hunting purposes, we don't really have our hunting seasons that coincide with when they're on their winter range. They kind of stop before. Now, they will start moving down, but the bulk of the deer aren't all the way on their winter range by the time our hunting seasons stop. But they will start like that last couple of hunts in Unit 2B. You'll get some migratory deer in there. They start moving toward the end of October out of the San Juan Mountains and around Durango. And then they'll start moving down into our neck of the woods, and you might catch some migratory deer on those last couple of hunts.
I'm guessing the timing of that migration coming out of the San Juans into New Mexico is going to be based on snowpack in Colorado. So what would that look like with, how much snow would they have to get before it starts pushing those deer into New Mexico?
So deer are interesting. For elk, that's 100% correct. They're more dependent, or it's more predicated by the snowpack. Deer, since they're smaller bodied and a little shorter, they can't really risk a dump of snow making them stranded in the high mountains and stuff. And so they're pretty well dialed into when they need to move or when they want to move, so they don't get stuck and so they can make their winter range and stuff. In Hall's work, that they found that it's either October 23rd or 27th, one of the two, was predictably the mean start of the mean migration. There might be a few coming in a little sooner and a few coming in a little later, but most of them initiated their migration at that late October time frame and then just stayed down on their winter range for the duration of the winter. So yeah, it's they can't really risk being stuck. But then, as we talked about, like in the sacks and whatnot, that is some snowpack dependent movements. And it would be more, I don't know, I would say, I mean, we've all seen them in deep stuff. We've all seen them scraping their belly or seen pictures of it at least on snow. But, you know, you get a foot, if you get a foot of snow, it crusts over, they can't dig down through it, they can't get their food sources and stuff, and have a little bit of trouble making ends meet during the winter times. So they need to kind of get out of there before it gets, you know, I'm guessing a foot, but I don't know that there's any hard research on it.
And is that report from Hall, I believe you said, is that report on the website, or is there a place where somebody can find that if they want to delve into this a little bit more?
So it's been a peer-reviewed publication. That being said, you have to have a membership or sometimes pay to get these publications. So you might just be able to Google or go onto Google Scholar and look up Hall Sawyer, Rosa, deer migration, or Google something of that nature. I'm sure it'll pop up somewhere. I just don't know where. It's not on our website, but it is commonly discussed knowledge, especially around, you know, like game and fish, or when we collaborate on projects with the BLM or Forest Service and things like that. But it's not, I will warn you, it's not always easy reading. It's technical and scientific. So sometimes it's easier to just read the abstract and maybe jump down to conclusions and look at the maps and stuff.
I would be the one to look at the maps. Again, that lack of patience. And is there any information? I know we've been sharing a lot of information on Mondays on our Facebook page from the Mule Deer Working Group that's part of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And I know you're a big part of that, but is there, I'm guessing there's a bunch of information there, and some of it may talk about wintering habitats or migration movements in those reports as well.
Yeah, so you're just asking, do I know if that is available for folks to look at? Yeah, you can Google Mule Deer Working Group. Just type that straight into your Google search bar. And then from there, it'll take, you know, you'll go to the website and then look at the publications. And we have a whole list of fact sheets that we've put out of commonly asked questions or emerging issues or things like that I know there's one that specifically talks about movement, migration, and the needs of deer during the winter time and things like that. And then a lot of other real interesting information that folks might find. But yeah, if you just Google that would be a real good source. And then from there, you might get ideas of where to jump off into to look at other topics of interest and things like that.
Perfect. I know that I found them really interesting when we're scheduling them for our social media posts, and I kind of read through them. I'm like, oh, very interesting.
I still, you know, I'm the deer biologist for New Mexico, and I'll get a call from somebody and I'll think, well, I want to tell them like exactly right, not just shoot off the cuff, you know? And so I still reference those things all the time. And I mean, I even a couple that I've actually written myself, I'm still like, wait, what did I say here? And have to go back and reread it.
And not to dive into that too much, but I sat in on one of the working group meetings last year, I believe, at the Summer Waffle Conference. And I always figured that somebody just threw some notes together and a couple of people looked at it and it got put on the website, but it's actually really in depth that somebody will author one of those papers and it ends up being looked at by, I believe, every deer biologist in the Western US, reviewed by every agency director before it's approved and put on that website. So it's a very thorough review that those documents go through.
Yeah, it very much is. It's a pretty defined and rigorous process, if you will. And then, we might write it and we might know of, say we want to write one on migration. Well, Matt Kaufman out of University of Wyoming, he's kind of on the forefront of migration research right now. And so we'll write it as a Western state biologist. We'll review it internally among the 23 Western state mule deer biologists, and we'll shoot it off to, say, Matt or whoever it might be, and say, hey, is this adding up to what you're finding? Is this still true? And that sort of thing. And the other thing we really be careful about is our needs here in New Mexico vary greatly from the needs, say, in like Washington or Idaho. And so we don't want to put something out there as a group that's going to be contrary to what they're working on, say, in Idaho or whatever, and it can even be stuff as minute as what word are we going to use? Are we going to call it a trophy buck? Or are we going to call it a quality buck, or are we going to call it a mature buck, those sorts of things. And then again, it goes off to the directors to make sure that everybody agrees with the research and the wording and things that went into it. And so, yeah, it is a pretty strict process and gets looked at by a lot of eyes before it goes out there.
So tons of great information. Let's switch just a little bit and kind of talk about the habitat and deer behavior a little bit. We've gotten several questions, and I'm going to kind of lump them together, but I'll kind of keep an eye on it to make sure we cover everything. But I've seen a lot of questions about drought and how that's affecting or could be affecting populations, as well as some questions on where did it go? When are they most active, and when are they going to be looking for water? So do you want to start there, and then I'll throw in more questions as they pop up?
Sure. So deer, like a lot of ungulates, are what we call crepuscular. They tend to move more in the mornings and afternoons. On those fringe light areas, or times of the day when the light's waning or it's coming off the darkness and getting more and more light, and they'll bed down middle of the night, process their food that they've eaten, and then get up again in the morning, eat, and then bed down for a large part of the day. Obviously, we've all seen them midday moving and things like that. Some of the bucks during the rut, they'll move all day long. They won't bed down at all. They'll just be in search of does. With water, deer are really cool and unique. Well, I'll say unique, but they're really cool that they don't need to drink a whole lot. I was looking up some exact numbers earlier, but like in the wintertime, they might only drink 1.2 quarts of water a day. During hot parts of the summer, might be 2.3 quarts a day. That's on average. Obviously, it varies based on, habitat conditions, temperature, moisture, stuff like that. But they tend to, because they tend to bed down during the day and process their food and things like that, and then they move more on the shoulders of the day. They've been found actually that the majority of their uptake of water occurs between hours of 7 to 10 p.m. So they're not really like, elk, they might hit water at any point in the day. They really need a lot more water than deer, but deer, they can make do without. They can operate on a state of partial dehydration, and then they can also get a lot of their water from the foods that they eat. So they really don't need that open source of water all the time. Did I go on a tangent, or did that answer what you were talking about?
No, that definitely answered the question. And I'm guessing the drought really affects some of that because they do need the water. In the evening, it was interesting to me that they're 7 to 10 p.m. When a lot of people are drinking of other kinds, they're out drinking as well. I'm assuming the drought kind of has pushed them into different areas as they seek that water or moisture in the ground. Have you seen big changes in the movements or where they're found at?
Yeah, they will make some pretty big movements based on rainfall and the drought and stuff like that. And one number I read said, I don't know if it's an individual deer or that specific segment of the deer population, I can't remember which, but they moved approximately 20 miles because there was a big drought here, and they were able to tell that there was water, or maybe they just went roaming and found water 20 miles away, and set up shop during that point of time when it was a drought in their home range, set up shop, and then once their home range received water again, then they moved back. So they were able to determine those long distance rainfalls and stuff like that. In general, when I talk to, say, like landowners, hey, how big a spacing should I have between my water sources? I say you really aren't benefiting anything if you space your waters closer than 3 miles apart, because they'll move 1 to 1.5 miles a day to get water, and of course they don't need to drink a whole lot, and then they'll move back into their their day use areas or whatever. So they will move, but they don't need real close water spacing to be able to take advantage of the surrounding habitats and stuff.
So then, is it going to have much of an effect, the drought, is it going to have much of an effect on either reproduction or the ruts?
Not so much the rut, but it definitely does on the actual reproduction, on the actual fawns that survive. So the fawn survival is really heavily dependent on habitat conditions. Obviously, everybody talks about predators, and they do eat the fawns, but their ability to find the fawns is based on habitat conditions, which ties back into moisture events. If the rainfall isn't appropriate to help drive that understory growth to hide those fawns, they'll have trouble surviving. And then with the does, if they don't have enough water to provide for their needs, their physical needs, or to nurse those fawns, they might provide less nutritious milk to those fawns, which in turn relates to the body condition and the ability of that fawn to evade predators or hide from predators. So it's definitely driven by moisture events, especially in our state. With the rut, it's not really, it doesn't really impact the timing, and it still occurs at the same time. Now, in the northern part of the state, we do have a shorter period in which they rut, and it's that like late November, early December timeframe. It might be a couple-week period in there that they rut. But in the southern part of the state, their rut is it might span a month or two. There is a little bit more of a peak in the middle of that, but it might span a month or two, and that's to help them take advantage of that, those moisture events. So like the doe might get bred early, and she might drop her fawns early, and then we have no moisture for a couple of weeks around the time when she dropped that fawn, so it has some trouble. But then by those populations developing that like extended rut period, they're able to maximize their opportunities for some fawns hitting the ground, or that fawn drop coinciding with the moisture events on any given year.
Interesting. So looking at that, I know that you've done a lot of surveys. Do you want to talk just in general about overall populations and how they're doing? And let's start with like the 4 quadrants of the state.
Sure. So we kind of structurally break the state into 4 quadrants, and that's as much administrative as anything, but it also helps us with like talking about stuff. And in the northern part of the state in general, so I guess ask your question again. You wanted to know how the surveys are? Yeah,
I just think overall populations, how they're looking throughout the state.
Okay, sure. In the northeast part of the state, they're doing pretty well. They're kind of a little more pocketed and sporadic around, on the fringes of those grasslands and things like that, as we talked about. But they're pretty stable. They kind of just bounce along. You don't really see a big increase or decrease between years in that part of the state. But I would say it's healthy. I'd say it's stable with a slight increase. In the northwest part of the state, And that we kind of define that as, say, like where units 52 come down, 52 and 51. That's our kind of defining boundary between the Northeast and Northwest. That Northwest part of the state, I would say it's doing good. A lot of that population, at least in that 2B area or that Farmington area, is driven by habitat conditions in Colorado and things like that, because that is a migratory herd. But in general, you know, the northern part's a little bit wetter, which helps that reproduction and the fawn growth and stuff, or population growth and stuff like that. So I feel like the northern part of the state is doing well. Some local populations are seeing some good increases, but in general, I'd say it's stable. And then the southern part of the state, I mean, man, it could really be, you might have a local population that's growing pretty well because they've received a couple of years of good moisture in one area. And then over the mountain range or on the other side of the ridge or other side of the mountain, it might be a little less. It might be on a slight decline, or it might just be kind of bouncing along just because they didn't get precipitation. But all in all, when you take the whole Southeast or the whole Southwest together and take that into account, I say they're stable as well. I can't really think of a place that's booming. That sandhill country, say like in 31 and 32, it always shocks me because it's so dry. In my opinion, it just looks dry, but it's where that some of that oak brush is and stuff. And those deer, they love that oak brush, Shinnery oak, I believe. But they love that oak brush, and they do really well in there. And plus, it provides the hiding cover and stuff like that. So I think that's stable to slightly increasing. But in general, southern part of the state, I'd say, is status quo for the last handful of years.
Looking good. And I know that you have recently been out flying surveys. When did those results, do we put those out on the website, or when will they be available for people?
So we haven't thus far posted them on the website. We've discussed it. We've toyed with the idea of putting them up and things like that. Some areas we have a bunch of years of data. I was looking at the graphs here earlier. You know, we might have every year for the last 20 years, whereas other units we might only check in on every couple of years and things like that. Anybody can ask me and I can, you know, tell them, yeah, we did or did not fly that, and here's what the ratios are, buck-to-doe and fawn-to-doe ratios. But we haven't put them online yet. The hard part is, like I've thought about it, and I've thought about like trying to do some population modeling to get like estimates and stuff, but there are so many assumptions involved with specifically deer population estimates that it's kind of hard. And you don't want to go out and say, okay, this population's 10,000 deer, but then you realize that one of the assumptions that was made to make that population estimate was incorrect, or there was some better data that comes up, and then it might all of a sudden be 8,000 deer, and then people get nervous because it looks like you really dropped 2,000 deer, but that's not necessarily the case. It's just that the information that you put into that population model was a little better informed when you reran it later.
And I'm sure a lot of the information that we get from harvest reports and throughout the year, so it's more than just flying at once, but information gathered throughout the year and over multiple years to help make that decision.
Yeah, harvest reports are really important when we're looking at, say, like tag allocations and things like that. We'll look at the survey data, we'll look at those buck-to-doe and fawn-to-doe ratios, and I'll explain what we're looking at with those here in a minute. But when we're deciding increasing or decreasing tags for a specific unit or area, we'll look at the harvest reports and see, okay, all things remaining equal, effort, you know, number of tags and number of hunters that we have out there. There wasn't some huge like weather event that caused issues for the deer or whatever. We really put an emphasis on success rates. So all things being equal, we assume that increasing success rates means that the deer herd is increasing. Decreasing success rates, we assume that, you know, effort being equal, that there aren't as many bucks on the landscape to be harvested. And so we kind of use that as a proxy to say, okay, deer population might be on a slight decline in this area and things like that. I kind of skipped over it a few minutes ago when you're talking about the surveys, and I wanted to say it is when we're surveying, we look at buck to doe ratios and fawn to doe ratios. I'm working on some methods and statistics to get at population estimates, but right now predominantly just get buck to doe and fawn to doe ratios. We look to have fawn to doe ratios 35 or 40 fawns per 100 does, and that means that population is stable. Any lower than that, it indicates that it's on a decline. But 1 year can make a big difference. So just because we get one bad year of survey data doesn't mean that the population is overall declining. It just means that it was low that year. So we look at the trends over a couple years. Once it gets above that 40 mark and we see a couple of years above 40 to 50 fawns per 100 does, that indicates that population's increasing. That's way lower for you folks that are familiar with some of the northern states. Like Wyoming, for instance, and in Colorado and Montana, they might see 70, 80, I've heard of 90 fawns per 100 does up there. The difference is we lose our fawns in the summertime because they can't get through the winter, and they lose their fawns due to winter die-off and stuff like that. So they're flying, well, they might fly post-winter too, but we just lose our fawns at different times. So that's why our fawn to doe ratios are so much lower. And then buck to doe ratios, I like to see them just for opportunity around 30 bucks per 100 does in general. We have some units where you might be 20 and that's tolerable as well. But we've found, and research has found that really it doesn't matter how many bucks you have on the landscape per 100 does. All does are still getting bred. So you could have, like if it drops down beneath 10 bucks per 100 does, all does might not get bred. But if you have above or like 10 bucks per 100 does or higher, 95 to 99% of those does get bred every year.
Interesting. So then it's just maintaining a genetic diversity.
An opportunity, yep.
Opportunity. Oh, interesting. So I lost my train of thought.
I've been losing mine the whole time. I go on these tangents, so just cut me off whenever.
I just get really focused, and then I'm like, oh yeah, the next topic. So I mean, overall, it seems like the populations are doing pretty good and staying pretty steady, or even growing slightly across the state. One of the things, I know it was in our outline to talk about further down, but I've had a bunch of questions on diseases and specifically CWD. So do you want to touch on CWD and the spread of CWD, and then we can come back to our outline?
Sure. So CWD is chronic wasting disease. It's a neurological disease that's spread through the fluids of individuals and things like that. It can be, spread because a deer defecated or peed in one area and another deer ate vegetation near it, or might have taken up that waste in their foraging. That's not to say it's running rampant. It's again a neurological disease that impacts how they act and things like that. In New Mexico, our prevalence is around 3 to 6% in the areas where we have it. So we currently have it in units 19, 28, and 34. Let me check it real quick. So it's not crazy widespread in our state, and in the areas where it is, 19, 20, and 34. The areas where it is, the prevalence is pretty low. So it's not spreading rampant, but it is a fatal disease when deer get it. They might be able to persist for a year or so carrying it and just not show the symptoms. And then those symptoms come on and they'll act lethargic, they'll lose their fear of humans and things like that, and drooping ears and whatnot. And then from there, they pretty quickly go and die. So we want all reports of folks that see deer acting like that, and we'll go out and try to remove them from the landscape, test them, and see if they have it. But yeah, it's not crazy rampant. I get my deer tested every year, not expecting that it's going to have anything, but you might as well get it tested, get the results. That helps us track it as a department and know if it's moved elsewhere. It's been found on all sides of us except for Arizona. And when it gets in Arizona, I'm pretty sure they're going to tell me that we gave it to them just to mess with us. But yeah, it's on all sides of New Mexico at this point. And so, and I'm not saying it's like right on the border, but the surrounding states have it. But I'm not too worried about it in the deer I shoot, but you might as well get it tested and see if it has it or not.
How do you go about getting it tested?
The best thing to do is contact our office, our main office currently, and get an appointment set up. You can there's a couple different ways. Once you say, hey, I shot this deer or elk and I want to get it tested, we might have an officer or one of the biologists meet you in the field and grab the sample. Or you can bring it into, if we get our offices opened up again, you can bring it into any area office and have it sampled. We do have a few check stations. In the southern part of the state, we set up a handful in units 34, and then we make it mandatory check-in, I believe, in unit 28. And then some of those migratory herds that we talked about earlier in the northern part of the state, we set up check stations in there just because they make such a long distance movement that their exposure risk is higher. And so we just want to monitor it.
So it's easy to get it tested. Is there a fee that goes with that?
No, it's free. We'll pull a sample. We will give you a number, the number of your sample, and then we have been in the last couple of years putting those results online. It takes a couple of weeks to get up online, but you can usually go back and check online. Another cool perk, if you submit a sample, and folks, you should look in the rule book. I think it's page, I'll tell you exactly, 37, but it talks about winning an incentive authorization by submitting your sample. And so if you submit your sample, you get automatically put in a pool to potentially get an elk tag or an oryx tag. And that's to help us, that's incentivize everybody to turn in their samples and then help us keep track of this disease and things like that. And a couple lucky individuals get to go hunting for either a real cool hunt for elk or oryx every year. So yeah, it's neat. With chronic wasting disease, check your rule book, page 37, but in those units where it has been found, there are some stipulations on what you can and can't bring out of the field when you harvest an animal. Basically, you can't bring anything with brain matter or spinal fluid or spinal matter or whatever. If you want to bring the head out of the unit, it has to be boiled or bleached. The skull cap has to be bleached and not have any brain matter or membrane on it and things like that. I saw an individual asked earlier, can you leave it in the field? And you can't leave the meat in the field. You have to take that out. That's a violation. You'll get in trouble for not taking it out, even if you shoot a suspected sick deer. So you have to bring the meat out. The best thing to do is to bone it out, take the meat out that you can. Bring the head out. You can't take the head out of the unit, but it can, you bring it out of the unit, turn it into us to get tested, bring it out of your hunting area, turn it into us to get tested. And then before you take it out of the unit, you have to clean it up. So plan for that. Take a pot to boil the skull in or something like that before you leave the unit. But yes, you have to take the meat out. And then from there, hold on to it till it gets tested. If it comes back positive, talk to us about the options and stuff. We have an incinerator that we can incinerate contaminated meat with and stuff like that in Santa Fe.
So one of the things that I've heard from other states, and I don't know if it's true here, but if you harvest an animal here, you cannot transfer any of that spinal cavity into another state. I believe Arizona has that restriction. Is there anything else that a hunter would need to be aware of when they cross state lines that you know of? Obviously, that state will have restrictions that they need to look into, but is there anything you can think of?
Not off the top of my head. Each state is so different. You might, you might come hunting out here from Ohio, shoot a deer, and want to take it back home, and you cross 10 states or whatever. I don't know, maybe 5. Anyways, you'll cross a few states, and each state might have a different protocol or restriction on what you can and can't do. Good practice is either get your meat to a processor and have them process it, or do it yourself, get it all packaged up. Leave the bones behind in New Mexico in those units, leave the bones in the CWD contaminated units and whatnot. Don't take anything with any sort of spinal fluid or brain matter out of the state. Good practice to just leave it in the state. But I don't know specifics other than those general practices. And it really, again, each state's a little bit different.
And would you avoid hunting one of those areas that has CWD, or would you just maybe be more attentive to the deer and their behavior when you harvest them?
I would just be more attentive. I wouldn't avoid it. I've hunted in areas in other states where CWD has been found and harvested some animals, and it doesn't bother me. I just get it tested, and I don't eat it till we get the test results back. That being said, CWD hasn't been found to jump to humans. It lives in the cervid world. The deer, elk, reindeer, and moose get it. There might be one more that I'm not thinking of, but it hasn't been found to jump to humans. But why risk it? You might as well, if you're hunting, especially in one of those areas, you might as well get it tested. Know that you're eating some safe meat. Know that everything's good and stuff. So I think it would be hard to jump to humans, and there's quite a bit of research out there on how easily it transmits to other species and stuff. And it's really fascinating. They've force fed, I'm not even gonna guess what species it is, but they force fed another species, I don't know if it was a monkey or something, contaminated meat, just constantly force fed it. And that they didn't find that jumped to that new species, but they have found that, say you inject those infected prions or those infected tissue matter into another animal, a macaque, I think it was, then it will become infected. So, they're testing it out. I don't know who they are, the people who track CWD, but that's they're testing it out. It doesn't jump to humans yet, but I'd rather not risk it.
And if you get it tested, you could get entered into one of those drawings for an elk or an oryx. So why not? So I did want one point of clarification. The proclamations that you are looking at in hand are last year's proclamations. So the print copies aren't out quite yet. Orrin doesn't get the advanced copy, but I've heard they will be out soon. But the page number is still correct for CWD information. It's still the same page number. So seen a couple of people wanting those paper copies. Soon they'll be there. So there's a couple other diseases that we've gotten questions about. And one, when we were talking about this, I believe it was about a week ago, you were telling me that some deer can have maggots in their nose, which I told you this earlier, and I think it's absolutely disgusting, but it's also very fascinating. So what if somebody finds maggots in the nasal cavity? What is that?
So those are nasal bot flies. What happens is the female fly will lay an egg on the nose, or deposit around the nose of the deer, and the larvae migrate up into the nasal passages, and then from there they just develop. They live in the back of the throat, in the back of the nasal passages, and develop. And they'll just hang out there, and when they're about 3/4 of an inch long, which is pretty significant, they'll leave the deer, come out through the nose or the mouth, go on the ground, and from there they'll pupate or turn into another fly, and that cycle just continues. It looks, so I've seen a few of some CWD check stations that I've worked at, and it looks pretty gross. You cut back in there, you look back in there, and you wonder what the heck, and sometimes they're just hanging on there, and it looks like it'd just be a huge annoyance to the deer, but really it's not an annoyance. I mean, it might maybe sneeze a little bit or whatever, But it doesn't hurt the deer. It doesn't get in the meat. It doesn't hurt to eat the meat if you shoot a deer with the bot flies. It's just going to be a little bit gross for a little bit. But yeah, just maybe look the other way or whatever. When they get noticed, somebody will shoot a deer and that deer will cool down and it won't have that same body temperature, and then that's when they start kind of crawling out. And so it might be in the back of your truck bed for an hour or so, and all of a sudden there's a couple of larvae sitting there by the head of that deer, and you're wondering where the heck this came from. But yeah, not to worry, it's not a big deal. It won't hurt you, it won't hurt the deer.
Interesting. So they're almost a host for that species.
Yep.
I'm glad that isn't a human thing. The other one that I've seen a question come up about is blue tongue. I don't know anything about it. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's blue tongue is what it's referred to blue tongue. It's not blue tongue. It's epizootic hemorrhagic disease, but they present very similarly. Blue tongue in cows or bovine and your beef cattle and stuff. It's spread by midges, and the midges will bite, the hosts, the deer, and the deer will become infected with this epizootic hemorrhagic disease. They present pretty similarly to CWD, a little bit of body behavior differences, but they'll get lethargic. They'll again kind of start losing their fear of humans. I believe their tongue will start to swell up a little bit, and you'll find them really around water sources. You'll find them dead in water or around water sources. It's not real prevalent in New Mexico. It can spread. I think we had an outbreak. I want to say it was in 2018, if I remember right, down in the southeast part of the state. We had some EHD outbreak. It can cause local population declines if the spread's great enough. Again, it's spread by midges. So what can you do? You can't go out and get rid of all the midges that fly from one deer to another, or jump from one deer to another. But that's how it's spread, and it can be really local around, in areas. And so you might see 10, 15, 20 deer dying off. And yeah, it can have a bit of a local population level impact, but in general, it's not a huge deal.
Interesting. I remember when I was in Wyoming hearing about that, but I believe it was right as I was moving down here. So I lost track of it a little bit, but are there any other diseases or issues that people may want to be aware of when they hunt?
We really don't have anything that will impact you or your ability to, harvest deer or eat their meat. Some things that I've seen personally, and I've elected not to shoot deer because it looked kind of gross and off-putting to me, is deer will get cutaneous fibromas. They're like warts. Actually, that's what they are. And they're lesions on the skin. They'll grow on the skin, and it looks like just big tumors or warts or growths on there. And yeah, they can be really bad. I've seen them around, not personally, just pictures. I've seen them, around the eyes and ears and nose and stuff. And if they're big enough and great enough, it will impact that individual and maybe make them die because they can't get the nutrients they need, or they can't hear or see the predators and things like that. Doesn't impact the meat, doesn't impact their behavior except for if they're having trouble eating or breathing or seeing. But in general, it's just like on their body, on their legs and stuff like that. And yeah, it looks gross. Still okay to shoot. Still, I would do it. The one I saw, I was hunting back in Ohio, and it was before I heard of it. I was in college, and it walked under my tree stand, and I saw it, and I thought, what in the heck is wrong with that deer? And I did not want to shoot it because I didn't know what was going on with it. Found out later, yeah, I could have shot that deer and not had any issues with meat or anything. So kind of kicked myself for that, but it was kind of funny.
Very interesting. So I don't see any reason disease-wise why I would put in for a unit or not put in for a unit. So when somebody contacts you and they say, I'm putting in for the draw and I want X. I want a trophy deer. I want to see lots of deer. I want to see, I just want to go have a cool hunt. That's an easy hike. How do you answer some of those questions? And maybe let's start with, I want to shoot a trophy or a quality or whatever that definition is that you want to use.
So I truly believe that you can find a record book buck in any unit in the state. Some units are more likely to have them than others and have a higher number of bucks harvested every year that might make the record book. And
Sorry.
The northern part of the state, that area has produced consistently in and out produced Rio County record book bucks year in and year out. I think, and this also includes the Jicarilla, but just that general area, Rio County has more record book bucks in the entry book, or in the record book buck entries in the Boone and Crockett book than any other county in the U.S. So if you're really looking for one that'll make that, say, Boone and Crockett minimum or whatever, I would look at those northern units, 2B, 2C, Unit 4, 5A, 5B, those sorts of things. Unit 2C, that's kind of our most coveted deer tag, it seems like. The deer densities are low there just because of the habitat type and the terrain and stuff. But man, we see in my flights and then just reports that I get from various hunters or outfitters or whatever, we see a lot of big bucks. There's a lot in there. We restrict the number of tags pretty significantly. I know some folks would like to see them restricted further, but we try to be careful with what we harvest in that area to keep that still a coveted tag. But there are some sleeper units, and don't want to make people mad by giving away their hot spots and stuff, but down around like Magdalena and stuff, I've seen some good bucks coming out of those areas in the last couple of years. And then Unit 33 in that Shenandoah country, that Sandhill country, that's one of our other areas that produces some real big bucks. And that's an area that I'm always impressed again with. Like, that came out of Unit 33 or out of Unit 31 or whatever. It just always blows my mind because it's just not what I personally, growing up back east, would picture as like great deer habitat. But man, it is really good habitat. But yeah, those general areas, when I say, hey, where can I go to shoot a big buck? I would say, down around Magdalena, Farmington area, and the Sandhill country are pretty much what I point at. I've seen some monsters coming out of the Pecos area in Unit 45, but I don't know. I mean, I've seen pictures of them and talked to hunters who have shot some monsters, but I haven't spent a whole lot of time up in there.
Yeah, me either. I hear a lot of comments though about that 2B2C area, and is it a low density? Is that how we're managing it for a lower density, or is it just that there isn't the habitat structure, the food and the shelter there to support a larger habitat base?
Yeah, so 2B, I would say the population's really high, especially when they come down. That's their winter range from Colorado. The resident population might be a little lower just because it's pretty arid and stuff, but there's still a decent resident population in there that doesn't migrate. But 2C, it's a pretty dry area. We're not going up in there. We're not saying, hey, we want to keep this herd low. I'd like to see deer populations grow in every part of the state, really. So it's more just the moisture events that occur there and the habitat type and things like that, the habitat base and whatnot that really just doesn't let it get to great numbers or real large numbers.
Interesting. And I had one question that was emailed, and I'm pulling it up really quick to make sure, about in 2B, several public lands that were locked. And maybe you have a different advice. What I usually tell people is if you see public land that is locked, to contact the conservation officer, and they can either verify that it is supposed to be locked per some agreement, or they can help get that unlocked. But I would definitely recommend contacting the officer. Have you heard anything different about that?
No, that's the exact advice I give as well. So the folks that have spent time in 2B know that it's an area that's heavily mined for renewable, for like gas and oil development. You know, they drill a lot for oil and gas up there. And so a lot of those roads are probably like lease roads and things like that, that they may or may not be allowed to lock. And so, as Tristana said, contact your local officer and find out if this particular piece is allowed to be locked. And sometimes, you know, it might originate on public land, but it might access a well on private land. And so they lock it there at that entry point because it actually is a private land well. And I don't really know how that oil and gas energy development leases work and how the access points and entries and things like that work. So the best thing to do is just contact your officer and find out.
Awesome. Okay, so if somebody calls you and they say, I want to see a lot of deer, they don't have to be monsters like that are in your picture, but I just want to see a lot of deer and hopefully get a good shot, fill the freezer and have a good experience. Where do you point people at for that kind of a hunt?
Yeah, that's kind of touching on how I like to hunt. I just like to get out there, and I'm not going to give you all my honey holes, but
you gave everybody else the secrets away.
What's that?
You gave everyone else the secrets away.
I know, right? Yeah. No, the southeast part of the state, like units 32 and 31, again 33. There's a lot of deer in those areas. We see quite a few fly-in and stuff, and that's one of the areas that surprised me. I recommend folks checking those out. Units 29 and 30, there's a lot of deer in there. You hear people talking that there used to be a lot more 30 years ago, and I don't doubt that that's true, but I still know there are a lot of deer in those units. So I point them at that. I like to hunt the northeast part of the state, just since you called me out on keeping my secrets. I wouldn't say there's a lot of deer in there, but it's fun to hunt. I enjoy it, but yeah, I think like the Jemez area, there's quite a few deer in there, the northern parts of the state. I haven't seen a whole lot of deer like in 50, 51, and 52. I know they're there. I think just the habitat kind of conceals them a little more than what I'm able to see. And then unit 23, that's a good unit for seeing a lot of deer. And I've spent some time down in unit 25 javelina hunting and saw a lot of deer. But I've heard from some folks that like that to frequent that part of the state. The Boot Heel in units 25 and 6 have more deer than one might imagine on first glance, and they enjoy that area. So that's kind of what I tell folks when they call in, and I really I try to gauge what they're looking for too. Besides just the type of animal they're looking for, like what experience do you want? You know, are you wanting to backpack for the duration of your hunt and have a isolated or solo experience, or do you want to get out somewhere in your RV, your fifth wheel, and have your family out and come back to that base camp every night and that sort of thing? And then from there, I also want to know, are you looking for mountainous type stuff? Do you want open country? Do you want an area where you can glass? And then I just try to dial them into what might suit their desires and wishes. So yeah, the deer population and the attributes of the bucks in that population help guide it, but I really want to know what experience they're looking for too.
Do you get many people that prefer whitetail or mule deer, and is it kind of even, just something that's a personal preference?
It's definitely a personal preference. I know a few folks that they love whitetail deer hunting, and it is a blast. It's a unique, or maybe not unique, but it's a not as readily available opportunity in our state because we just don't have as many of them. But predominantly, most of the hunters are looking for mule deer in our state, or they call me, they're wanting to know about mule deer hunting, and then I'll get some Coues or Cow's whitetail deer hunters calling about those opportunities. But yeah, the main call that I get is for mule deer hunting.
In all of the hunts, you have to either choose mule deer or whitetail. Is there any that are any antlered deer, or is it you have to choose?
Yeah, no, it's actually a reverse. I think you just got them a little bit mixed up. So in general, we call it a fork antlered deer. is our limit, or our bag limit. And from there, you can choose whether you want to shoot a mule deer or white-tailed deer, and it just has to have one antler that branches. So say you're hunting in Unit 34 where there's a known population of whitetail. If you see a whitetail buck that you want to go after, or a mule deer buck that you want to go after, you can effectively do that and just shoot whichever one gives you the better opportunity, or whichever one you want to go after. But in the northeast part of the state, and then in the very southwest part of the state, we do have northeast. We have a separate white-tailed deer tag. So we have our fork antler deer tag, and then we have a separate white-tailed deer tag. And with that, you can only shoot a white-tailed deer. And then in the southwest part of the state, we'll have a mule deer tag specific, or a white-tailed deer tag specific. So in general, we try to let it be hunter's choice, except for in those few areas where in the northeast, it's just to give a little bit extra opportunity, just because not a lot of folks go after white-tailed deer. So we think, it can handle a little bit more harvest and whatnot. And then to kind of restrict what people are shooting, or to make them, to keep our Kyle's white-tailed deer population at levels that we want to see them at, and that sort of thing, or to even distribute hunter numbers and hunter pressure and stuff, we will allocate mule deer or white-tailed deer tags.
Okay. So if you wanted to just put meat in the freezer, or maybe for a youth putting in, are there a lot of doe hunting opportunities?
Not a lot. We have some specific areas in our state, mostly found around population areas, like around Roswell, Silver City, and things like that, where we will have some doe hunts. We don't typically, and then we have some white-tailed deer doe hunts in the northeast, or either sex white-tailed deer hunts in the northeast. But we don't typically want to see a whole lot of does harvested in our state, except for in those, say, problem areas. And the reason is doe harvest can be additive, and because those are the ones that are bred, and raise the fawns and produce the fawns and stuff like that. If you hit the does too hard, especially in the southwest part of the state, you will see population declines. There's some historic information. I can't remember the years, but there's a few books out about it, and I just finished a chapter on it also, where I want to say in the 80s, maybe, we did harvest does pretty hard in New Mexico and Arizona, assuming that doe harvest in our arid states would impact the population similarly to how doe harvest in the northern parts of the state, or northern states, are impacted. And we found, or they found back in the day, that actually shooting that many does off of the landscape in our arid state drives the populations down. So we want to see more does on the landscape if we can.
So in the areas where we do hunt them, it's more of a population management, because they're coming an issue into urban areas, or affecting drivers or something along that line.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. They'll just become a nuisance. They might eat ornamental shrubs, and the local tolerance of the residents in that area might not want it, or there might be a lot more incidents of vehicle strikes and things like that. And so to help alleviate those incidents or those undesired outcomes, we'll try to allow some antlerless opportunities in those areas.
Okay. And I got one question a little bit ago on Facebook, but what urban centers seem to have the most deer in town?
So Silver City, we have a hunt in there to alleviate that pressure. Silver City has some deer issues. It seems like since that hunt's opened up that those issues have subsided, so it has been working as our intent. Real quick about that, and then I'll continue your question. Silver City, for folks that draw a 23 or 24 archery tag that don't harvest during their regular hunt, they don't harvest a buck during their regular hunt, they can go into Silver City hunt area, and we give out a map every year of that perimeter, and they can go into the Silver City hunt area and harvest an antlerless deer if they have an unfilled tag. Ruidoso, that's one that's kind of been creeping up as an area that may be causing problems with the residents. It's a little bit contentious because some folks really want to see them, and some folks don't like the damage that they do to their ornamental shrubs or gardens and things like that. But there are quite a few deer and elk. I don't know, for folks who have been there, there's quite a few deer and elk running through the streets there. As a wildlife watcher, it's a lot of fun. You know, you can see a lot of animals and stuff, and it kind of, not to the degree of Estes Park, Colorado, but it kind of puts me in mind of that area, just because you'll be driving down the road at a stoplight and some elk will run in front of you, or deer will, or whatever. And, you know, as a wildlife watcher, it's fun, but I also recognize the issues that it causes with people. And then around Roswell, the ag fields around Roswell and stuff like that, it does cause some issues with folks trying to grow their crops and whatnot. So I would say those are the three big areas that come to mind. Raton, there's a lot of deer in and around Raton. There seems to be a little bit more of acceptance of them up there. They can be a nuisance to folks, but people aren't incredibly upset to see them. And obviously, there's individuals that may or may not be, but quite a few deer in that area. We actually have caught on the Raton Golf Course a couple of times to test for chronic wasting disease, just because it was a population of deer that was pretty high and pretty easy to get to and stuff.
That's interesting. Well, and that makes sense if it's in Colorado, and those herds could move down from Colorado. So.
Sure. Yep.
So one of the other questions I'm seeing quite a bit of is an advantage, or would there be more of an advantage to a point restriction, especially in some of the areas where we want to see a larger or an older class of bucks residing?
Yeah, so that's and you and I have talked about this, Tristana, and folks can go onto the Mule Deer Working Group website and look at the fact sheet that we put out about antler point restrictions. But there's been extensive research done on antler point restrictions, and it doesn't achieve the desired goals that folks think it'll achieve. What happens is, you might have a 3-point restriction, and then you kind of start topping off your antler development. I don't want to say genetically, but that once they hit that 3-point mark, folks are more inclined to, they're going to shoot them. And so you kind of achieve the opposite of what folks think it'll achieve, because you're cutting off that top end. And then you have some issues with illegal harvest, because somebody shoots maybe a 2-point that they thought had a 3rd point, and then it gets left in the field. So you might have increased buck harvest based on that, or you just have some animals left in the field because somebody doesn't want to get shot, or get sighted. So it just doesn't achieve what folks think it'll achieve. And so I would recommend going on that website or checking out the Mule Deer Monday stuff that Tristana's been putting out. I know she had the APR fact sheet on there, I don't know, a month or 2 ago, but it definitely details that pretty well, and it kind of lays out the issues of it and why it doesn't really get at what folks think it'll get at.
That's so interesting to me. I know you and I have talked about it a lot, and I find it just fascinating. I'm always amazed at my marketing and finance degrees, and when I look at this agency, I always learn so much in talking to you guys. So I miss being in the office and running down the hall to just pick your brain, or like next week we have Travis on to talk about elk, and I just learned so much. So I'm loving all of these questions. And my next one, I just lost my train of thought. 1 second. We'll come back to it. As soon as it comes back to me, we'll come back to it. But I have a couple of questions that are kind of rolling. And I know what it was while we're talking about hunting. I believe it was last year, we separated some of the hunts. I believe there were archery hunts that you could choose September or January. Is that correct? And now they've been separated. Can you talk a little bit about why we did that, and why the Game Commission did that, and the benefits that you're seeing?
Yeah, it was a way to so when they were combined, when we had September hunts combined, so what you could do is if you had an archery tag for deer, it was basically a split season, either September and January. And so when it was combined, we were finding that folks predominantly waited until January before they went out hunting, and they weren't really hunting in the September timeframe, which makes sense because that's closer to when deer are rutting and stuff like that. And they'll likely see more deer, and it's not as hot and whatnot. So, but we found that was the case. And then most harvest was focused in that January timeframe. So when we split them up, we were doing a couple of things. We were able to increase the number of archery tags that we put out because, so we might not have put, so say we had 100 tags in a unit. We had 100 folks that were hunting in January instead of September. That was when all the pressure was. But when we split them up, we were able to say put 50 tags in January. So say we had 100 tags and we were getting 50 deer shot. In January, we were putting 50 tags in January now when we split them up. And then say a 50% success rate meant that we had 25 deer shot in January. And then in our September archery harvest rates, success rates are lower. So we were able to say increase from 100 tags total in that unit. I'm probably not explaining this very well. 100 tags total in that unit, we put 50 in January, and then we could put say like 75 or 80 or 100 in September. Our harvest isn't as high in September, but it's providing opportunity. And we were allowing folks to kind of choose what opportunity they wanted to go after. Some of those September tags are left unfilled, or they're sold in the fire sale. Mm-hmm. But when I looked at the harvest rates, let me see it here real quick. I'll find a unit. We effectively, we're killing about the same amount of deer, maybe a couple more in some units, but we're providing some opportunity. And it looks like folks are still pretty happy with that September timeframe. Let me see, unit 32 is one. So we had about a 14% success rate in September in unit 32 for 17 deer killed. And then when we had the January hunt, this was last year, 2019 numbers, we had 20% success rate for 18 deer killed. I don't remember how many tags we gave out under the old rule, but I know we increased that unit some, but we're harvesting about the same amount, and folks are still really happy with it. We're still at that 3.5% or 3.5 satisfaction rating, which is what we want. We want to see people as happy as possible, but we know not everybody's going to be happy, but people are still really happy with this split and stuff.
So it sounds like we decreased some of the pressure in January. We increased opportunity, and harvest is staying very steady. So it seems kind of like a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you explained it way better than I did with my stumbling over numbers and stuff.
Only because you explained it all. I can get the Cliff Notes version. Okay, so I know we've been talking for a long time. I have several questions that are going to be a little bit sporadic. But we've kind of talked around a lot of these topics. This first question, I think it might be a little bit of a setup just based on the name of the person who asked it, but do you know what species of deer climb trees?
No, I don't.
All right. I said try. So Nathaniel, you'll have to give us the answer to that one. And Orrin, you can seek revenge at a later date.
Yeah, he's got it coming.
All right. Okay, so from a conservation point of view, what are we doing, or what are people in New Mexico doing to help support fawn survival?
So it's twofold. It's not really an easy answer. Some places it's predator driven, fawn survival might be low because of predators, and other places it might be more habitat driven. So it's not always top down or bottom up. It typically is on some gradient. But what folks are doing is I recommend habitat improvement above all. You want to provide hiding cover for the fawns. You want to provide areas where the does can get their nourishment and also escape from predators and stuff like that. So I recommend increasing that understory, finding ways to increase that understory of habitat, whether it's letting some pastures rest for a growing season, things like that. And we have a lot of landowners who are really excited about improving habitat for deer, and they'll do just this. I have some folks who they have specific pastures they never put cattle on, and you'll see the deer populations be a lot higher in those pastures or in those areas. But then you'll have folks out there trying to control predators and stuff. I tell people that when they're driving around, checking fences or moving cattle, or if you're out there hunting, shooting a coyote opportunistically doesn't do anything for the habitat. Now, if you want to shoot a coyote, go for it. I think it's awesome. If you want to either predator hunt or you want to shoot a coyote for a pelt, or you want to hunt them and sell the pelts or whatever, I say go for it. I have no issue with that at all. But if it's not a real focused effort, if the coyote reduction effort isn't focused right around that fawning period, it doesn't really achieve the goal of increasing fawn survival rates and stuff. But you asked what people are doing around the state to improve fawn survival. I'd say habitat improvements such as we discussed, and our agency has quite a few habitat projects going on to do just that, to help improve deer survival and fawn survival, and then predator control and lion control and stuff like that.
And do you know if a person from the public wanted to support one of those projects, is there a group that they could join, or a way that they could help either with on the ground work, or the question wasn't asked, but maybe even a financial angle, because I know those are all expensive, but is there a way that somebody could support a habitat improvement project?
I would say, talk to us, but Mule Deer Foundation is really who you want to join up with them. Get in contact with Colleen Payne's the regional director of the Mule Deer Foundation, and she's really good about knowing what projects are coming down the pike and coordinating between different constituents and landowners for habitat improvements on private land, but also she helps out quite a bit, or the Mule Deer Foundation in general helps out quite a bit on public land as well. So I would say get in contact with Colleen. Volunteer, things like that would be, volunteer with their projects and with their concentrated efforts would be the way to get involved.
Great. And they can be a lot of fun. I've been out with several groups in the past, and it almost becomes a family out working on a project together instead of just some random person that you've met along the way. So those can be really, really great. Okay. The next one, have you seen an impact with the wildfires that have happened in New Mexico on the deer populations, or the smoke, if it has impacted deer at all?
It doesn't typically impact deer in the negative and in the short term. So if a fire runs really hot and kind of scorches the earth, it is a little harder for the vegetation to rebound, and it might not be as beneficial. But in general, I get super excited when I see prescribed burns or wildfires that are not endangering life or property. If they're just out there burning on their own away from everybody, I personally never think that's a bad thing. Again, if it runs real hot, that could be an issue. But what it'll typically do is it'll, maybe for a year it'll regenerate, or it'll lay dormant for maybe a year until that next moisture comes. And then once that moisture comes, it really regenerates that undergrowth and just provides a lot of good forage and hiding cover for the deer. So I get really excited. In the short term, to the actual individual, it doesn't impact them. We've had, and other states have had, animals collared in wildfire areas, and both deer and elk, they'll move out of the way, they'll go over the ridge away from that fire, and then once that fire burns through, they come back, and it's really neat. Colorado, so they had a big fire year this year, and up around Rocky Mountain National Park on the north side of it, they had some elk collared, and it was on a newspaper news link that I saw a while back, but they had some elk collared in that area. And it showed the movements of those individuals, and it was, you could see them the day the fire came through. They moved over the ridge or went into the drainage, and then as soon as that fire burned through, they're right back there and whatnot. So smoke doesn't bother them. Yeah, some can get trapped, but not many. They're usually really good about moving out of the way of those fires.
Interesting. I've always been surprised afterwards when you come back and it's just, the moisture has gotten to the ground. There's not as much competition, and it just greens up so much faster than other areas. And we have one comment about prescription fire and how beneficial that is. And I would tend to believe that just based on that regrowth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super beneficial. We habitat managers and wildlife biologists and just wildlife managers in general like to see fire introduced on the landscape and try to get like a natural fire regime. And it creates a mosaic. So we all know that the deer are edge type animals, and they like to take advantage of those edge habitats. And so that fire burning through, it creates a lot of edge. It meanders through, and you'll have an open area here and a real thick treed area here, forested area here, and that's just really good stuff. And with the lost rods, that's just really good stuff for deer and elk. And yeah, the meandering nature of those fires is really good for populations.
Interesting. Okay, next random question. Do you know how much your odds improve if you put in for an archery hunt versus a rifle hunt? I know we've talked about draw odds before on previous episodes or sessions, whatever we're calling these webinars, but do you know, I'm sure it's a significant increase.
Yeah, the rifle hunts are applied for more quickly than the archery hunts. I don't know, like I can't give you numbers of how much it would improve because it would vary greatly based on areas and stuff like that. Those September archery tags, like I said, there's usually a lot of those left over, a handful of those left over in the fire sale. So if I were to rank them, like if I were to say what's the hardest tag to get to the easiest, I would say the hardest would be a rifle tag, followed by a muzzleloader tag. January archery tag would be third hardest, and then September archery tag would be easiest. That's just that's the nature of everything. I mean, I have not tried to archery hunt. Well, it's not. I archery hunted deer in Utah a while back, unsuccessfully. But since I've been in New Mexico, I haven't tried to archery hunt them. And part of that's because I'm not confident in my ability to get close enough to them for a bow. I mean, those things can hear like crazy, and so I prefer the rifle, and that's just ease of getting an animal or ease of potentially getting an animal. I mean, I still limit how far I can shoot. I don't shoot real far with a rifle, but it's just typically a little easier. And so that's kind of the nature of how people apply for it too. Like, what's my better chances of getting an animal if I get a tag? So it's kind of how I think of it.
I agree. I put in for a muzzleloader elk tag last year because I had a better opportunity of getting drawn, and it was my first chance to test out a muzzleloader, and I carried it around. I did have lots of practice time at the range, so that was a good thing. But on the harvest reports, I know that sometimes it can take us a while to get it out, and I'm assuming that has to do with some of our hunts that go into January and then having a reporting deadline at the end of February. I believe it's the 17th-ish. But is that the main reason that harvest reports can take so long to get out?
Yeah, that's it, exactly. So we have that deadline of February 17th, like you said. I think that's what it is. But that being said, our application period doesn't end until March 17th, if I'm remembering right. And so you have a February deadline where it has to be done, has to be reported by then, and then we still give a period after that mid-February date, where folks can still report, but they're going to be dinged, I think, $8 for a late reporting fee. But that's why we put it out so late. So when you're trying to apply, we want to make sure that we have all the reports in that we can get before we run those harvest stats. So when you're trying to apply, you're really looking at a year's lag, and that's the reason why. Just so we make sure we have all the reports in that we can get.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then another question we got a person has lived in the Queen area, which I'm not familiar with, but maybe it's on your map or you know. And they used to have several deer that would show up on their cameras, and now they're getting more different species, elk and such. Is that because elk are pushing deer out of the area, or do you happen to know what might be going on in that situation?
What specific area was it?
Queen.
Queen. Okay. No, I wouldn't say so. So there is some interspecies competition. Obviously, they eat some of the same or a lot of the same food sources, but I wouldn't say so. Queen is down in Unit 30. I wouldn't say that the elk are pushing the deer out. They do compete for the same resources, but what happens is as that habitat kind of gets older, a lot of times those beneficial shrubs that deer used to be able to eat, the shrubs get older and they're now out of reach for the deer. They can't stand on their hind legs and get, those new growth shoots on those oak brush or pinions or whatever. And so the habitat gets older, but the elk, they can take advantage of it. They can reach higher and they can more quickly take advantage of those food resources that are out of reach of deer. So it's not like deer or elk are pushing deer out. It's just what each of them can take advantage of.
Okay. Double checking. Okay, back to diseases. Have you seen or do you know of any issues with guzzlers or water catchments? And is that a place where diseases such as CWD can spread?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is an area where it can concentrate deer and make them in contact with each other more quickly. And, we've all seen deer coming up to each other, sniffing each other and whatnot. And that's a potential for transmission if they arrive at that water source together, potential for disease transmission. It's not, I guess that's the best way to say it. Yes, it can increase the transmission rates, but I wouldn't say that that's the only issue or only way that they could get the transmission of the diseases and stuff.
Okay. And I think we are getting to a point where we are fairly wrapped up on questions. I'm sure I have missed some because the chats have been going crazy, which is awesome. And we are still seeing a few questions about either very specific units or very specific locations. And I think in those that might be best just to give us a call to really dive into those details. Because there's just no way we can talk about every spot or every unit without keeping you guys here way past an hour and 40 minutes that we've kept you all here now. I do want to make one correction. I said that the harvest report deadline without fee was February 17th. It's actually February 15th. So 2 days before what I said. I apologize for that. And I do want to remind everyone that the deadline to apply for bear and turkey is less than a week away. It's 5 p.m. on February 10th. So definitely be getting those applications in if you have not already done so. And then of course, March 17th at 5 p.m. is a deadline for deer, elk, pronghorn, ibex, Barbary, oryx, and I'm sure I'm missing something in there, but the rest of the big game species. So I want to thank everyone that joined us on Facebook. We've had a really good following there, and everyone that has stuck us out here in the Zoom panel. And Orrin, thank you for your time. I know you get to work a lot of nights and weekends, and I appreciate you donating one more to the department, or not donating, but working one more evening with the department and providing this great information. So thank you for your time.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for everybody that tuned in and listened and provided some great questions. It was fun.
Yeah. And for anybody who's wondering, this is recorded. It will be on our Facebook page. Here, as soon as we end the meeting, you guys can go watch it at any time. And all of our previous sessions are also on Facebook. So go back and watch those. Next week, we're going to be talking with Travis, who is our elk biologist. So make sure and join us then, and have a good evening, everybody.